Welcome. We are here to discuss how, as teachers, we can create a space online that will engage our learners, provide a platform for rigorous instruction, and a warm and welcoming space for both you and your students. For those of you who think that the connection and welcome begin as a student enters your session or walks through the door of our classroom, this series of brief videos will demonstrate that there are a number of things you can do beforehand that will set the tone you desire and begin creating that sense of community within your class before session 1. So let's get started. A bit about the videos you are about to view. There are 4 in total. This that you are viewing is the introduction, and this will lay the foundation for the subsequent videos, focusing largely on your online presence. Then we will move into structuring your course, Pillar 1. Next will come communication strategies in a remote environment, or Pillar 2. And finally, delivery, which will cover our Pillar 3 topics. By looking at your class and using these 3 pillars to organize, communicate, and deliver your engaging content, you will have created a strong foundation for successful instruction. For those of you in the ESOL classroom in the spring of 2020, you are familiar with some of the challenges we faced as we experienced the rapid transition to remote instruction. Some of these challenges included just really having no idea where to begin. Many had issues with access to the technology, and not just the students, but teachers as well. Those with the access were not entirely comfortable using the technology necessary to teach and learn with it, and we experienced the inability to communicate effectively with students while not sharing that same space. We also initially had issues with student persistence and attendance, and for some we felt the loss of the sense of community that we believed we could only successfully build in an in-person environment. Research which has examined the transition to remote instruction mirrors our concerns as well, with the greatest of concerns of organizations, teachers, and students being access to the technology. We have all heard this many times. Some students may only have access to Wi-Fi via their phones using public Wi-Fi access points, and some of our rural communities here in Massachusetts have no Wi-Fi at all. Having said this, I also want to emphasize that this lack of access is not only found with students. Many program staff continue to have outdated equipment, unreliable access to Wi-Fi, and I honestly have been in sessions with teachers who are in their cars outside a high school participating using the high school internet. And finally, in terms of access, we have a very large number of students who are able to access our classes using only their cell phones. Anecdotally, that number is as high as 80 to 90%, so the challenge is providing instruction that can translate into the small screen and understanding the fact that your wonderful lessons and plans will need adjustments in order to prove meaningful for your students. Another widely noted challenge is the technology learning curve. Many have thought they are moving their instruction online. Now they must learn and deploy a large number of tech tools to be able to effectively teach. I'd like to dispel that myth right now. Be mindful to only use tools that truly support your desired learning outcome. I also always follow the K.I.S.S principle, keep it sweet and simple. And simple does not have to mean being boring or not engaging. The simplest of practices can keep students actively participating. For example, using your chosen platform to have students raise hands or type a chat, use a simple poll or nonverbal communication tool. It's a great way to involve your students. And if students are using video, they can write their answers on a piece of paper or a whiteboard and hold it up to the camera in order to participate. It does not have to be fancy to be effective. Only 1 or 2 tried and true is really a much better guiding principle than confusing yourself or your students with unnecessary technologies. And rounding out the top 3 in the research that also connected with our own identified challenges was the loss of sense of community. And honestly, this is the one I have heard about more than the top 2. The loss of sense of community is being experienced by students and teachers alike. This is where our jobs get really challenging. How do you, as the instructor, lead the class to a place of comfort in a remote setting? How do you create your online presence and encourage students to do the same? Before moving on, and lest I present the challenges of a remote learning environment as insurmountable obstacles, I do want to say that the recent transition also brought about some positive outcomes. Some teachers are reporting that students are taking more responsibility for their own learning, finding ways to participate and engage even if it was challenging. And we cannot deny that digital literacy skills for teachers and students have expanded greatly. One article in the Journal of Inside Higher Ed posits that we jumped ahead 25 years in our integration of digital literacy and online learning. This exposure has led to increased confidence in the use of digital skills and the desire to continue learning new skills. It has been very heartening to hear that teachers are determined to continue learning and growing in this platform beyond the pandemic. That is so important, not only for themselves, but for their students as well. And finally, the coming together of each of us with our peers to brainstorm ways in which we can continue to meet the needs of our students has been very inspiring. In this introductory video, I'd really like to focus a bit on the ways that you as teachers can create a welcoming online presence for students, whether you're using phones, texts, texting apps, emails, Google Docs, video conferencing tools, conference calling tools, Google Classroom, or any other tool to engage with students. There are elements you can incorporate to ensure that your students feel comfortable and that you have created an environment for meaningful learning to occur. For this introductory video, our goals are simple. Clarify some basic terminology that we will be using and you will be hearing around different teaching modalities. Discuss the concept of community of inquiry as it relates to our instructional practices, and to introduce you to the 3 pillars that will be highlighted in the remaining videos in the series. Many terms are used in the discussion of remote instruction and remote delivery, so I think it would be helpful to clarify a few definitions to ensure that we are all singing off of the same sheet of music. These definitions come from research, instructional design texts, and peer-reviewed journals. They are those that we use in the ESOL PD Center to ensure that we each know what the other is referencing. So let's start with remote instruction. Remote instruction is teaching which occurs when students and teacher are not in the same location. It can include synchronous and/or asynchronous learning activities. Synchronous meaning in real time, such as Zoom or any other video conferencing tool. Or asynchronous to include self-paced content or a recorded lesson that is watched by the student at their convenience, or any number of activities students complete on their own outside of your synchronous sessions. And generally, it entails moving content designed for in-person delivery to an online platform. You'll also hear remote instruction referred to as technology-assisted instruction, technology-enhanced instruction, or virtual instruction. Blended learning is another term you're going to hear an awful lot about. Blended learning is a deliberate mixture of online and face-to-face activities with the goal of stimulating learning. It combines online and remote instruction with in-person or face-to-face instruction where materials are provided prior to and between synchronous or in-person sessions that allow students to gain foundational knowledge, come together within a class setting, and build upon that knowledge with your carefully designed instruction. It's often used interchangeably with the concept of a flipped classroom or hybrid learning. Face-to-face instruction, and this is a funny one because it really used to encompass a majority of our professional development and student instruction. When we were all together, it was face-to-face. At this point, however, any type of real-time interaction where we can see each other and interact is considered face-to-face. Zoom sessions, for example, are now face-to-face, as are whatever video conferencing tools you might use. In-person has really replaced that face-to-face terminology at this time and refers to situations where we are in the same physical space at the same time with our students. Each of these modalities provides a different means with which we can communicate with our students. The common thread throughout is the intent of supporting learning and developing a community of inquiry, which integrates all elements present in a classroom setting: social, cognitive, and teaching presence within the learning setting, which is the crux of our work today and which we will discuss in detail. So what does the research say about online presence and the creation of a community of inquiry within our classroom? One study conducted by the Journal of Computer-Assisted Learning defines online presence as the instructor's design, facilitation, and direction of cognitive and social processes to realize personally meaningful and educationally worthwhile learning outcomes. The The Journal of Educators Online discusses an online, remote, or blended course experience within the context of developing a community of inquiry, which I mentioned, and which is led by the instructor, and the development of well-structured lessons appropriate to the classroom environment, the sharing of your own social presence, and the support of students in creating and sharing their social presence while participating actively within the class setting. The community of inquiry is what we strive for in our classrooms. So, as a quick recap, as noted in the literature, successful remote instruction requires cognitive presence, which includes the well-structured lessons focused on your curriculum, social presence, which includes creating that personal connection with students, demonstrating your commitment to their success through excellent communication and the creation of an environment conducive to learning, and teaching presence, wherein a facilitator is prepared to share themselves and support students in learning and connecting with their own learning in the classroom environment. So, what might that look like? Creating that community of inquiry where you can achieve authentic and successful learning outcomes provides us the opportunity to examine remote instruction within the context of the three pillars of successful remote instruction: structure, communication, and delivery. We're going to discuss each of these three pillars in more detail in the upcoming videos, as they are the foundation for success. In doing so, we will examine structure. Remember at the beginning of our time together when I mentioned that success in the environment begins before you ever lay eyes on your students or before they entered your classroom? You do that by structuring your course to ensure that students are clear on expectations and format from the start. It's really all about planning, having your mind's eye what you would like your class to look like. How will your class be organized? Do you plan to have synchronous sessions? Will attendance be required? Will you record them and make them available to students? Will your class follow thematic units? All of these structural questions will help you to organize and plan for instruction and provide clarity for both yourself and your students. We will look at communication, which is vital. How do you plan to communicate with students? How often should they expect to hear from you? How would you like them to communicate with you? And how quickly can they expect to hear back from you? All of these are things you want planned out and clearly communicated. Finally, we'll look at delivery. Will delivery be synchronous using Google Hangouts, Zoom, WhatsApp, FaceTime, Skype, or asynchronous with Google Drive, Docs, email, something else, a combination of both? How often will you meet? Will you require video or leave video as optional for students? Will you do a check-in with your students each session? What is the tone you would like to set in your time with your students? So let's get practical. There are many ways to achieve these goals. Lots of tools and tricks, but as I said earlier, I want to keep it simple. So at the conclusion of this series, you have a strategy for moving forward or continuing to move forward. For those of you who have been feeling comfortable, maybe this will be more reinforcing what you're doing or give you a couple of new ideas that could help as we go forward. For those of you continuing to find your way, I hope the following few practical ideas will help you to see how to manage your classroom more confidently. So let's get started and dig into these three pillars a bit more. Click on video 2, the first pillar, structure, to continue exploring.